Heading into week 3 of Penn State football training camp, and things are starting to emerge. We're getting new information and some breaking news on the BWI Daily Edition. Senior editor for Blue White Illustrated, Nate Bauer, he's coming up next. We'll be discussing Drew Allar, Johnny Dixon, Keziah Holmes, Ken Talley. All that coming up on the BWI Daily Edition. And more, by the way. I should have said and more. Nate Bauer, senior editor of Blue White Illustrated, joining the BWI Daily Edition. Nate, we've got a lot. I said this before the show. On Saturday, I was going to call you and I was going to say, hey, Nate, do you want to do this a little bit early? Maybe we record a day early because there was some breaking news we had to get to. And since then, there's been like 4 things that have happened. So we've got all kinds of information to get to today. So thank you for making some time on a very busy Monday.
Of course. It's actually really funny. As after I dropped my kids off at daycare, I thought to myself, I'm really not sure what I'm going to do today. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about. And then things have happened in the time since. And so there's plenty to talk about. And yeah, we're happy to do it.
Okay, so actually, we'll get to Ken Talley leaving the Penn State roster a little bit later, even though that is the breaking news today on Monday.
Yeah.
We want to start with something that I think Penn State fans are more interested in.
Yep.
And the thing they're most interested in is finding out what players are standing out in camp, what sort of inside information and insight we can get. And a couple of things have stood out that you've gathered, and I want to go through some of those today, including one big update on one important player at the most important position. So give us what you know.
Man, you're killing it. You're selling it, buddy. I love it. So Drew Allar, I think it is fair to say has taken steps, and this is kind of coming from a variety of feedback that, that I'm kind of able to gather. It's important to keep it in context though, right? So on the one side of things, some of the feedback that I've heard and that I've reported is that Drew Allar has taken steps, right? Better command of the offense, makes the throws, it's starting to click. And that was a conversation that we had in the spring, right? Was just that it's a lot. And so that was why part of the storyline in the spring was that Bo Pribula was a little bit ahead because he was able to make more plays with his feet. He was able to do different things that didn't require a mastery of the offense necessarily.
Right.
Right. And so that created a little bit of separation there. But what's happened, I think, in the time since, and again, I'm making some inferences here, but I think that it started to click. It has started to come together. Drew Allar has come back in preseason camp and has shown that he just has this better grasp, and it's demonstrating itself. It's actually kind of interesting to me because I went into last week's midweek, right, our Wednesday Q&As with James Franklin, and I thought to myself, I didn't get an opportunity to ask the question, but I thought, it's pretty clear, right, that Sean Clifford is number 1. That's not up for debate. Christian Veilleux is number 2. We know that. How much emphasis is there on establishing a 3 and a 4, right? How integral is it to have that kind of set in stone, and what is it going to look like? Because my suspicion is that James Franklin would say that yes, there will be a pecking order going into the first game at Purdue, but that it will remain a competition between those two guys for the rest of the season, right? Week in, week out, 3 and 4 will compete.
You don't need to set a 3rd or a 4th in a hard sense like you do a 1st and a 2nd. Those guys can continue to compete all season long because it doesn't really affect, what you're doing on the field. But it is an important thing to have happen, right? The sooner you have these young players exhibiting a mastery and a command of the offense, the sooner you can get to a realistic conversation about them playing. And that doesn't
100%.
mean this year. That means a realistic conversation about them playing in a real sense next year or, later in the season. You know,
just
I don't want to rule that out because I feel like we've ruled out a lot of stuff, and
yeah.
I don't want to have to come back on all of these things.
Listen, anything can happen. Penn State, and I mean Christian Veilleux was the third string quarterback going into
Right.
the first game of the season, and so the third string quarterback in effect ended up starting a game or playing a game the duration of a game at Rutgers for Penn State last season. So it's not irrelevant, right? These like obviously you don't want Sean Clifford to get hurt. You don't want Christian Veilleux to get hurt or to have a flu game or any number of crazy things that can happen over the course of a season, but they do happen. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think that when you're looking at the class of 2022, when you're looking at that quarterback position, any signs of progress, any signs of development, taking a tangible shape, a palpable shape,
Yeah.
is good news for Penn State. And
Yep.
so in Drew Allar's case, I think that's what you're starting to see is that those steps are being taken.
And that I think is important considering where we came from. I wrote something about Mitchell Tinsley earlier today on the BWI BlueWhiteIllustrated.com about where he was in the spring and where he is now and what James Franklin had to say about his progress from a physical standpoint over the summer, which is something he pointed out. Getting to that point is important. Like, even if it is a stated thing and kind of an expected or known quantity, having it happen is important. So Drew Allar, where we were, as you pointed out, wasn't really getting it right away. Was the clear fourth, I think, was a fair way to put it in the spring. Even if they were even, what I understood and what I saw was it was Perbula and then it was Allar. And now the fact that it is seeming to take a step the other way, or at least coming back more towards that center point, is very important. So that's an update from the quarterback position. Do we have any other players that you want to name, you want to talk about? You saw Johnny Dixon get an interception on our highlight video here just a second ago if you're watching on YouTube.
Yep.
So do you have anything else on him, or kind of what's your thought about that, which we discussed last week?
Yeah, he just the hype train is in full effect, right? I mean, and this is kind of the way that things go. Zane Durant in the spring had that buzz. This, I think it is very, very fair to say this preseason, Johnny Dixon has that buzz, right?
Yeah.
And so is it enough to bump Kalen King? I don't think so. Right? I don't think that that's the conversation that we're having, but for all of the things that aren't being said or weren't being said about Johnny Dixon in terms of off-season conversation. I mean, you and I can say this with a straight face and very honestly. It's not like we were talking about Johnny Dixon a ton.
Right.
We were talking about the collection of corners and the depth and feeling confident there and secure. This is different from that conversation. This is Johnny Dixon is a very good corner who has gotten that much better through the summer to where by the time that he got into preseason camp, and look, this isn't just background feedback that's coming to me or coming to us. It's Tig Brown saying it, right? Tig Brown last week on Wednesday said that I'm paraphrasing. He said that Johnny Dixon took 10 steps this offseason, right? I think my question was just like, oh, what kind of step has he taken? And he said he didn't take a step. He took 10 steps this offseason because it's clicking. First year in the program last year. A lot to grasp, a lot to handle. And in a big effect, that's taken place with a lot of guys this year because of the transition to Manny Diaz.
This is something I was expecting from him last year to kind of say what I said last week, but say it better is I was expecting these things from him last year, given his profile, what I saw at South Carolina on film, and just like his level of talent and the ability to translate that in the first year and have Kalen King get ahead of you as a younger player.
Yeah.
That's, I think, an interesting thing. The second part I want to dig into is kind of that dynamic. Kalen King now in his second year, maybe all of his hype didn't translate to the field in a production way last year.
Yeah.
With an older player like Johnny Dixon, this seems like it's going to stick. Like he's going to be around this year. This doesn't feel like something that's going away unless Kalen King has the ability to distance himself so far from the group that it becomes a non-starter.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because Kalen can be as good as he wants to be. And like the talent is all there. I don't think that that's up for debate. And I don't even want this conversation to turn into questioning Kalen King. I mean, the buzz is there for him too, right? Like Penn State just feels, and again, these are things that have to translate to the field. You have to actually see it in games. So it's important to lay that out as a caveat here. But what Penn State sees and what observers of the program are able to see is that Joey Porter is NFL early round talent. He's that good. Kalen King is probably the same. He's trending in that direction. It's just a matter of translating it to the field. But now Johnny Dixon is entering into the conversation of, hey, this is a guy who we thought might have some talent and was expected to be a big piece when he first got to Penn State, that it's translating now. It's actually happening. He's taking those steps towards becoming that quality. Again, we're talking mid-round, upper round NFL draft pick type stuff from from Johnny Dixon. Yeah. Daquan Hardy. We don't talk nearly enough about him. And the conversation between us is always, hey, we don't talk nearly enough about him.
Well, here's the problem. And this is something he said in the spring, is he feels like he can do more than just be a third down player. Like I thought it was very clear when he talked to us, he was publicly stumping to get more playing time in different positions because he does have a very limited role, but it's a very impactful one. And now they've got 4 guys. I thought last season, continuing the conversation about Dixon, he played slot for South Carolina, as a freshman, or at least as a young player. I forget if it was a freshman or sophomore. So they've got so many players that could play in several positions that you're in a very good position if you're Penn State football, having so many of these corners taking that step. And by the way, identifying these talented players, investing in them, and getting them to this point. That's a huge turn that I think we are kind of underselling in general, is that these aren't just, and this is no disrespect to Grant Haley or to Christian Campbell or any of the players that come at this position previously, but having guys that have legitimate NFL potential to play and to start on Sundays, that can be a transformative factor for your defense and for your team if the rest of your offense and defense can match that level, because it's one of the hardest things to find elite corners. You can find players that can play. Elite corners, that's up there on the list of, hierarchy of football needs. So that's a very good position to be in for Penn State football.
Yeah, I already hear the devil on my shoulder, the first time that Joey Porter gets a pass interference,
right.
Oh my goodness. You guys sold us a bill of goods.
We put them under the microscope. They put them on the spotlight. These are the expectations. If they don't live up to those expectations, which have been set, and I think those are fair and reasonable ones, by the way, then that's also part of the conversation. Kind of like some of the other players we'll get into here in a second, the expectation of, from their skill set and their abilities and where they get to then at the end, sometimes it doesn't get there. And that doesn't mean you were wrong. That means that there are things unforeseen or stuff like that. I want to get to quickly though. I want to get to the last position group of players that are standing out. And it's a pretty good sign that 2 of Penn State's 5-star players are on this list, right, Nate?
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, when you say 2,
I guess you could. All right. Well,
we're talking about Nick here, right?
Yeah.
No, right.
The 2 we're going to talk about.
Well, look, and Dani-Dennis-Sutton is the 3rd 5-star, and there's lots of buzz about him too. So, look, it's Nick Singleton obviously is the guy that we want to talk about here.
Yeah.
But Katron Allen too, and this is a point that James Franklin hammered home, but also just generally speaking, this preseason, and this is how I kind of laid it out to our message board and in the notes package that I put together the other day, is just there's the physical element, right? That's kind of the foundation for all of these guys when we're talking about it is, do they have the physical ability? Are they prepared physically to take this on? Right.
Right.
Nick Singleton, absolutely. Katron Allen, absolutely. And so you
Mm-hmm.
check that box. You move to the next step is, how do they handle the learning process? How do they pick up the position and everything that's being asked of them? Because it is different. It is different from high school. So much more complex, so many more things that you have to adjust to and be ready to handle. In the spring, I think for Singleton, that pure athleticism and the ability to make plays was always there, but there were some hurdles to clear
Right.
from that other aspect of taking it all in and being able to grasp all of it.
I think it's a
But
fair comparison between the quarterback position and the running back position. If Nick Singleton has the athletic abilities to pop early and to be noticed early, Katron Allen had the mental and also physical skills,
Yep.
but more so the mental skills of playing in a system that was similar to Penn State's offense, because IMG does some higher level things than Governor Mifflin.
Yep.
So just like the quarterbacks and Bo Perbula showing up early, Nick Singleton now is rounding into form from a mental aspect as well as a physical one. Is that a fair way to say what, this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just the better way to put it is just that these boxes continue to be checked, right? Is that anything that's
Gotcha.
put in front of them, whatever that hurdle is, they've done it. They've been able to succeed in those areas, and it's both of them. It truly is. I mean, look, if we're not talking about the fact that Kevon Lee returns as Penn State's leading rusher for the past 2 years. This guy was atop the rushing chart for each of the last 2 years, but is very much in a situation where it's going to be tough to maintain and keep a hold on that job, not just from Nick Singleton, but from Katron Allen too. Both of those guys are just making such a push. It's a great position to be in if you're Penn State, because you desperately need it, and it tends to raise the level of everyone's play. So that could end up being Kevon Lee. But both of those guys have created for themselves and established for themselves a level of trust and respect, you name it, within the program, that I think sets both of them up very, very well for what's to come this season. You got to do it on the field. You got to do it against Purdue. You got to do it against Ohio. And then you can proceed from there. But so far, all good stuff.
So with that in mind, those two running backs we just talked about, and another piece of information coming out last week, Penn State held I believe it was their first scrimmage of the season at Beaver Stadium. Mm-hmm. You saw the social media announcements Thursday night. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, several players have hit the transfer portal, including one, Keziah Holmes. Mm-hmm. So to me, that seems like a pretty clear indication of, in kind of a separation point, and that's what James Franklin has talked about previously, of these scrimmages, you get a little more information. You get to kind of put all of what you've seen in practice into more of a simulated test. And we find now where we have a couple players that have transferred. And for Keziah Holmes, truthfully, it feels like it's about the numbers, right? It seems like a pretty clear painted picture that what we talked about all year has come true, that there's just not enough. There's too many mouths to feed in this backfield for people that want to take that step and to play this year.
Yeah, it's difficult, because certainly if you're Penn State, I think you'd rather have 5 than 4.
Sure.
I think in terms of an insurance policy, because I don't think that Keziah was behind the others, but when you look at the others, it's easy to understand why. That doesn't mean that he's not a quality player, that he won't have an opportunity that I think he very much has the ability to make the best of, right? Somewhere else. It's just the writing is on the wall a little bit. He was behind coming out of the spring. These other guys, right? I mean, when Nick Singleton and Katron Allen can come in their first semester on campus and very clearly and quickly distinguish themselves in that room, it's going to be tough to come back from that, because those guys are both going to continue to take steps forward. So, yeah. So that's Keziah fare thee well,
Yeah. And so this is what I was talking about earlier is I have been very publicly high on his skills, right? He's a speed back that's 215, 217 pounds. He can break tackles. I've seen these skills in practice, both in games and from what we've seen at, in practice from highlights and stuff like that. Those skills didn't diminish, but there's always, when we talk about evaluation and scouting, this is why you can't speak in absolutes, because I love everything about his game, and I agree. I think he's going to find a home and be a productive running back. It's just not going to be at Penn State because of the situation and the circumstance we've described. But there are other things that you don't know, and this is the part of NFL scouting, high school scouting, that the coaches do and the talent evaluators in the building have to do, that is possibly more important than your physical skills, because I don't want to diminish that. You have to be talented to get on the field. But if you don't, and I'm not saying this about Keziah, there's so many other factors that you don't know from film that go into being good at football. Yep. And whatever ones didn't align for Penn State and for him to be behind, taking a red shirt, still being behind, those are the things that you don't really know just by watching film. You can get an idea, but you can't ever really know. But I agree. I think he can go somewhere and he'd be a very productive running back. I think he still got borderline, like he'll have a chance to be a guy we talk about later as a skill that maybe left Penn State, figured it out, kind of like Zach Kuntz being on the freaks list this year.
Totally.
I think he's got those sort of skills. So it's just not going to work out at Penn State, but that doesn't mean that it was I don't think it was a bad recruiting evaluation by Penn State. I don't think it was a bad decision. It just is one that didn't work out because they don't always work out.
Yep. Yep. That's what happens sometimes. That, because honestly, Keziah Holmes was the first that year that he came in, I believe it was 2020, that off season. I mean, he was the first guy that had people's attention.
Yeah. Because he's explosive. Because he's super fast and he bursts out of the hole. Yep. You can't not notice that sort of stuff. But that isn't the only thing that gets you on the football field.
Yep.
With that in mind, and recruiting, here's another situation that I had my reservations about the longer this went on. But this is the breaking news today.
Yeah.
Penn State football. It's not, Keziah Holmes isn't the only player in the transfer portal. Who else left the program today?
Yeah, so Ken Talley, he's an edge rusher, 3-star kid. I think he was a 4-star On3 consensus, but 3-star as rated by On3 and their talent evaluators. So he exited the program. This is actually kind of, I don't know if people are interested in this or not. I pre-write stories, right? And so like as the class of 2022 was coming in, okay, so that included transfers, Hunter Norzad, right? It's like, okay, well, hey, they've arrived to campus. Every time one of these kids enrolls, it's news. In our world, it's news, right? Because they're here, they're at Penn State. I had a story written for Ken Talley in the middle of June, right, ahead of the second summer session that just never right. I mean, first it was, hey, could he possibly enroll for the first, like for the May semester? Nope, that window passed. Could he enroll for the second summer session? And that's when the bulk of the remaining pieces, right, 5 or 6 guys, that's when they all came in. Nope, wasn't going to happen. Could he come in after that, right? At some time after that window where that second academic calendar semester of the summer transpired? Nope. Had to wait until the start of preseason camp. And so he finally enrolled at the start of preseason camp in August. I mean, I think, I'm just waving my red. This is all I have. I'm waving my red flag. These are all red flags to me. Yep. So no, it was just hurdle after hurdle, kind of delay after delay. He
Yeah.
finally was able to enroll at Penn State. And, it was after, like, he wasn't going to take any classes for the summer. And so
Yeah.
he has not, to my knowledge, needed to be enrolled in any classes at Penn State. So I think I always want to be careful in situations like this.
Yeah. There's a lot of unknowns.
There's a lot of unknowns. I'm not reporting anything in terms of a why here.
Yeah.
However, if you're looking at the totality of his situation, there were very clearly some complexities that were preventing him from having the normal course, right?
Yeah.
The traditional course of enrollment at Penn State. And so the fact that he's now exiting the program 2 weeks, really, just a little over 2 weeks after getting to Penn State in the first place.
Yeah.
Not shocking, not surprising, certainly disappointing for him and disappointing for Penn State, but not complete surprises.
You hope for the best in these situations for these, because these are 18-year-old kids who are enrolling at school with a lot of pressure coming from a lot of different places. You don't know what's going on, and that's, I think, the important thing for me to remember as well, just from a football perspective, right? So the situation at hand with a person's life and what's going on behind the scenes, you don't know. But I do know from a football perspective, it is too hard to be good at football and balance those issues, whatever they may be. So those things prevented him from getting to campus. Those things prevented him from integrating into the team and having, as you described, a normal process. And when those things start to pile up, hard red shirt was the obvious place to start for a lot of reasons with Ken Talley.
Yeah.
But then, you got through, he's not even on campus yet. What's going on? You start to then wonder what's the translation going to be from there.
Yep.
And it just seemed like there was this compounding snowball effect of things were just going to be too hard for him to get integrated, to really have a productive training camp, getting your life situated, arriving on campus at the same time. So unfortunate situation, unfortunate circumstance. Hopefully we find some information out about it and we can learn more as things go on, but it's breaking today. We wanted to talk about it here at the end of the show to give you at least the context of the storyline, even though we don't really have any hard information about it. Anything else you want to get to before we get out of here?
No, I mean, look, it is a preseason of, in so many ways, and I guess that this is always the case to a certain extent, but optimism. I just think that the more, and I mean, knock on wood for all of their sakes, that there hasn't been a big injury yet, right?
Yep.
There hasn't been this cloud of stuff that always tends to happen. It just hasn't happened this preseason yet. And so Penn State has, I think, in so many respects, gotten itself to a place where it feels really good.
There's so much good news today on the show. Your 5-star quarterback is going to be starting by the middle of the season. Nick Singleton's going to be an All-American his freshman year. You got all the other stuff going on. Johnny Dixon, 3 deep at cornerback. They're going to have an all-world defense this year. They're going to be the Georgia of 2022. I'm just painting with the words that you're not saying.
Yeah, and I don't.
All these things are working out.
I'm not going to be the guy. I'm not going to be the guy that says that, because I just, that there's a difference between how you perform in practice and how and it is essential that you do all of those things right to be able to translate it.
Yes.
But you also still have to translate it. And so, and to be honest with you, there are cases where you don't do all of those things right, and guys are just gamers. They just go out there and are better than they look previously. But in Penn State's situation, in Penn State's case, this preseason, that is the vibe. The vibe is, and we've been talking about the vibe since March, right?
Spring.
The vibe for Penn State football is, hey, no one expects anything out of these guys after the last 2 seasons. That's the reality is, right? What's the over under? 8 games, 8.5. There's an opportunity for this group with the potential that they've shown, with the improvements that they've made all off season, to do some good things. And last thing I'll say, Tig Brown verbalized it on Wednesday. Yeah. He was asked whether or not he thought that this was a conference championship caliber team, and he had no hesitation. He had no hesitation in saying that it was. And he added, like, it's not just me saying it, right? It's not just because that's what you have to say, is that we have that quality of team because he's a leader and, doesn't want to disappoint people. No. Right. He's saying, hey, look at the work that we've done. Look at the players that we have. When you put all of those things together, they have the talent to be able to compete with really, really good programs, the top of the Big Ten. Yep. And we'll see what happens. We'll see where it goes.
One part that I'm in, just to round out what you're saying, what I've read and what I've seen is, Adisa Isaac, watching him in practice, seeing as explosive as he was. We covered that on the Thursday mailbag show, that I was really impressed with that. PJ Musford looks, fine. He's coming along. But to hear the words that people are saying about Dani, knowing them, knowing what he was before and expecting those things, but then to hear it reinforced and added upon, that pass rushing situation with Chop Robinson, who's also, doing well, that was a huge question for me. And those questions are being answered. So the more of those that you get, the more optimistic you can be from a realistic standpoint of here's possibilities. Those possibilities are now starting to stack up and being realized. Nate Bauer, one thing I realized, we got to get out of here. So thank you today for coming on and giving us all the information, the lowdown on what's going on inside Penn State training camp for 2022. So thanks, man. Thanks
so much for having me, buddy. Always appreciate it.
That'll do it today for the BWI Daily Edition. Subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff on our podcast, all that stuff on YouTube. Make sure you do all that stuff, and we'll keep bringing you inside information, all the goodies here on the BWI Daily Edition. Coming up tomorrow, the recruiting show is off, but we'll be back with the BWI Daily. We'll talk to you then.